Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new edition of the Lasching Out Podcast and the Nittany Sports Now Network. My name is Jarrod Prugar, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Kevin Quigley. Kevin, Penn State lost again to Northwestern, 22-21, and that wasn't the only thing that happened Saturday night. Drew Aller's season was ended with what looks to be a fractured ankle, dislocated ankle. And then people woke up Sunday morning and went through their mornings, and about lunchtime, poof, James Franklin was fired. And that's the right move in this moment. For as good as James Franklin has been, I think it was 104 wins versus 45 losses over the course of 11 and a half seasons. But, we're 10 months removed from two being a couple plays, a couple minutes away from the national championship game and a national championship berth. And they lost 3 in a row. The two of them were absolutely inexcusable. And the performance Saturday afternoon, rather, dictated this firing.
Yeah, and I don't think this is a podcast either of us thought we'd be recording this year or anytime soon. 2 months ago, or even, 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when we were previewing the Oregon game. And it's just the wheels have fallen off the bus. It's the end of an era. And, I told you before we went on the air, I really don't know what to say. He was the coach there when I was a student. I was there for 1 year. Bill O'Brien, James Franklin comes to town. A road trip to Indianapolis for the 2016 Big Ten championship game. Like, there's a lot of good things that James Franklin did, but unfortunately, the good things dried up. And with all of the opportunities that he got, never consistently performed against high-level opponents. And maybe you can say that the rosters weren't there or whatnot, but when you dub this season as the most complete team you've got, the most expensive payroll you have, including his own contract, including his defensive coordinator, the highest paid in the nation, got to be close to the highest paid offensive coordinator in the nation. One of the highest paid rosters in college football, probably the highest in Penn State history. You return everybody on offense that you wanted to. You made the additions, and then you just fall flat on your face. And it stinks. I think, obviously they're not going to win the national title. We don't know if they're going to go to a bowl game this year. And yeah, it's crazy what 3 weeks can do in college football.
Without a doubt. I mean, you nailed it on the head. There was a lot of good. 2 Big Ten championship berths, a Big Ten championship, 2 Rose Bowls, national semifinal appearance last year. That was 10 months ago. That was just 10 months ago. And so quickly things have changed. And the reason why, and this is just pure speculation, obviously it seems like the locker room isn't together. That's pure speculation. But I think you can see it in some of the post-game comments that players have said throughout the year, especially after the game Saturday. It just felt ominous last night on the field. It was very bizarre. I've never been a part of a game or atmosphere like that. It was one of the first times. It was the first time all year that I've actually been on the field to end the game. You could hear the boos, the fire Franklins from not just the students but the fans alike. And listen, James Franklin did a great job for the university, and he was, the casualty of his own self in what he was building at Penn State. Listen, Penn State as a whole, outside of the wrestling program and the success of women's volleyball, really was middle of the road, not necessarily where they expected to be up until he came. And he turned that around. He turned Penn State back into a perennial power in that 5 to 10 range. But what Pat Kraft wants is that 1 to 4 range. He wants those national championships. He loves Cale Sanderson. Guy Godowski went out and got Gavin McKenna. They went out and paid for that. Katie Schumacher-Colley won a championship last year, national championship. They're winning national championships at every level. And when football is the front porch of the university, you're putting $700 million into a brand new stadium expansion, and you're not living up to those expectations, a move had to be made. Listen, we talked about this on the podcast pregame. The Oregon loss is excusable, right? You lose to a team that's not a top 5 or whatever. Of course, Oregon did lose to Indiana, who is still on Penn State's schedule for the rest of the year. But, double overtime, tough game. Then you come out and you lay that egg against UCLA. That can't happen. You lost to 3 interim guys and a coach that literally forgot to call plays here and there. And that's no disrespect to Jerry Neuheisel, but that's just kind of the way that it happened. And that's an issue. Then you come out and it was less than inspiring play. And that was even before Drew Aller got hurt, because Drew Aller got hurt one play left in Penn State's football game on the offensive side of the football. So his career ends on the same night that James Franklin's did at Penn State, and that's a shame for Aller. You don't get to create your own legacy and end on your own terms. Same deal with Franklin. You feel for the person, but from a coaching standpoint, you got to make. Pat Kraft went balls to the wall. He went out and got Jim Knowles. He went out and he's paying these guys, and the results have to show it. This is a Penn State team that was number 2 in the country. They went from number 2 to poo. And that's a problem for Penn State, and that's a problem for James Franklin. Listen, he lost 10 of 11 to Ohio State, 10 of his 45 games. When you're losing almost a quarter of your games to the same team, something's got to give. I don't know if that would have changed this year, but here we are, 6 weeks into the season. Not only is there not going to be a national championship game, there's now Terry Smith as interim coach, and I think that's a great opportunity for him to finish out the year. But there might not be a bowl game, because looking at this schedule, and listen, we took them to win 11, 12 games. They might not win a single game. You're looking at that back half of this swing here. You've got at Iowa at night. You're off. You got Ohio State. Then you got Indiana. Then you'll have Rutgers and not Maryland, but Michigan State, and I think one other team that I'm forgetting later in the season. But they might not win another game, and that's scary to say for a team that had such lofty expectations. That we had a podcast about it. Can they meet the expectations? We thought they could, and unfortunately, not only did they not fail to live up to expectations, they didn't even live up to anything this year.
Yeah, and I think put yourself in Pat Kraft's shoes, right? James sells him, and I think James is the ultimate salesman, and I think Pat Kraft is an ultimate businessman, and he had to make an incredibly tough decision. It was an impossible decision. Unfortunately, the decision was made impossible because of Sandy Barber and the 10-year deal that she gave James Franklin, which is unheard of in college football, especially if you've not won a national title. Like Nick Saban can't even get a 10-year deal, couldn't even get a 10-year deal in Alabama. So just that part of it was tough. But then, yeah, like you said, James goes to the well and says, "Hey, Pat, I need $3 million for Jim Knowles. I've got to sign this Big 12 offensive coordinator to a 4-year deal that's going to max out at $2 million in 2 more seasons." Koto Nicky's still under contract for 2 more years after this. I don't know if he survives this whole shuffle. I don't know if the team has $3.8 million to buy him out after this season. Luckily, with the transfer portal, this is not the end. Usually, with any sort of coaching change like this, the roster could be in free fall. I think mostly on the defensive side of the ball, I think that stays intact. Maybe Poindexter interviews and gets the head coaching job. But yeah, the team was just uninspired. If you look at the post-game press conference, James Franklin's opening statement was 45 seconds long. He was defeated. I wouldn't say that. I don't know if the players quit on him, and I don't think that's a fair claim for me to make. But James's body language on the sideline, he was not fired up at all. You and I talked on the pregame podcast, they needed to come out and whoop Northwestern's ass yesterday. 35-0, 35-7, something of the lopsided nature. Go out and beat the spread, because you're 0-5 against the spread this year. Now you're 0-6. They are the 2 worst FBS losses this year, according to Vegas spreads, and they are the only team in 30 years to lose back-to-back games where they are favored by 20 or more points. To me, that's the nail in the coffin. And you can't have Vegas be your decision maker for you, but Vegas is telling you what everyone else's eyes see, and that's that your team that was supposed to be up on the penthouse is now in the dumpster out back. Like, I don't know where it went wrong. I don't know where the doubt came in. And then, like, on the recruiting trail, you had Kevin Spale in the 2027 class. Like, just the confidence was faltering in securing a top talent in the state of Pennsylvania in your backyard when they hadn't even lost a game yet. But the 3 games leading up to you losing the game, the team looked like crap. And I think, we were just hopeful that, they were just mailing it in. But something happened in the offseason. I don't know if their head got too big or there's, my shit doesn't stink or something. But this team just came out this season. It wasn't ready. And ultimately, as the head coach, doesn't matter what you did last year. This is a performance-based industry. And if you're not performing, guess what? You're not going to have the opportunity to perform either.
Absolutely, Kevin. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, something definitely happened, because this is not the same Penn State program that we've seen in years past under James Franklin. It does very much seem like Groundhog Day. And the Oregon game, 100% is Groundhog Day, right? You're playing a team and you just don't get the job done. It's the same song and dance. Drew Aller throws the back-breaking pick to seal the deal for the other team. It's the same shit, and it's a different day, right? You just get sick and tired of that as fans, as players, as coaches, and it's tough. Like, it's pure speculation to talk about what goes on in that locker room without being in there. Penn State trotted out 4 different players, I think it was 5 after the loss. And, first of all, that's tough, right? That really limits what journalists are able to do, what people covering the team are able to do. That's not shocking, so to speak, given the circumstances. But, when James Franklin's mentioning nothing about thinking that he's the guy long-term here in his post-game press conference when pressed about it, talking about just being there for his guys. And listen, you can't doubt that he believed in his guys, loved those guys. They're his guys, right? And that was one thing I don't think you can ever bet against for Franklin and his staff in doing so. But now, you've reached kind of we thought we reached ground zero or rock bottom, if you will, last week when they lost to UCLA. But that rock bottom fell out, and now it's even worse. And that's the problem. That's why I think Pat Kraft made the right decision. Listen, the $49.7 million buyout is not cheap. I would love to be that bank account when that direct deposit hit, when he gets his payments. Unfortunately, I won't sniff that, but it's just one of those situations where Pat Kraft is an aggressive dude. The dude wants to win and win at all costs. Literally, there isn't a single thing out there that I don't think is unwilling to pay for. And that is such a great thing for him. You mentioned Sandy Barber. This is on her. There's a rumor going around, and some sources have told me that, Franklin asked for another extension at the end of after last season. Didn't get it. Maybe the egomaniac in him, which is very possible and has been seen, maybe it completely turned a switch. I mean, there's a reason Jaywan Sider left. And now he looks like his decision was the right call. Tom Allen, he's been a struggle with Clemson, but they're starting to turn things around. And that's not saying that, look at a guy like Andy Kodanicki. He was just moments away from taking the West Virginia job to come back for this team to run it back. But something along the lines, somewhere along there, something happened, got in the way of their success. And listen, I think this is a testament to Coach Saban and the teams that have perennial successes. Because let's be real, Penn State hasn't won a national championship in 40 years. So to say they're a national championship contender every year probably isn't fair. But, Franklin had them in that conversation. And it has to go from that conversation to actually putting up or shutting up. But it goes to show you how successful guys like Nick Saban are, not only just to win, but to consistently win year after year after year, when complacency can be deafening. Complacency can really, really threaten your program. But that complacency never really happened. They consistently won at elite levels, one-upping each team year after year after year. And that's why, guys like Saban are the greatest of all time.
Yeah, I think, the talk going into the 12-team playoff era was that James would have made the 12-team playoff in 7 of 10 seasons or whatever it was. And then you come out in the second year, you make it in the first year, good job. Probably could have gotten a top 4 seed, just didn't happen because of the way the seeding structure was. But then the next year, you're just not competitive, and that's this year, right? I think it's a shame the way it's ended. James Franklin will never be able to set foot back in a state college. Like, he's not going to be able to go downtown and have a beer without somebody throwing one at him, or just yelling at him of like, "Hey, are you going to lose to Ohio State this weekend?" Like, I don't think it'll be ever peaceful for him, at least for the next 5 or 10 years, which I think is a shame, because what he's done to the program, this isn't Georgia where dudes are going out and getting speeding tickets and DUIs and killing people drag racing. Like, the program is buttoned up. The worst you've ever heard is, players smoking weed in their dorms. Like, who cares? Like, no one can ever say that James Franklin did not develop good men, put a lot of talent in the NFL, and all around a good players coach. It's just unfortunate that, player development was probably suboptimal. Player development at the quarterback position was definitely not it was non-existent, quite frankly. Ruined Christian Hackenberg's career. Trace McSorley, his career probably got a boost because he's a 3-star guy who's a safety, and James Franklin's the only one who was going to put him in as a quarterback. Sean Clifford, I don't think that was his game, but Sean made it work finally. And then Drew, just James Franklin was hard-headed, and I think the way he's handled his entire career, didn't let that guy go out and sling it. And Landon Tangwall was talking about, because he was there with both of them, and like, the James Franklin message in the locker room is don't mess up, don't make the mistake. Like, games are going to come down to one critical play, and you better not make that one bad play. And that's just pressure. That's gripping it too tight. That's stepping up to hit your tee shot and be like, man, I hope I don't slice this into that glass window over there. And guess what you're going to do when you hit that drive? You're going to slice it into the glass window. Like, it just seems that he's done a lot for the program, never was able to succeed at the level that the fan base expected him to. I think, fan base expectations were probably, I will say they were overzealous, like expecting
100%. 100%.
There's 120 teams in college football, or it's even 130 now. Like, expecting your team to win the national title every year is unrealistic. And for some teams, they've never won it, but Penn State wants to get back there. They are fully capable of it. They have the money. They have the facilities. The fan base is there. It's going to support a team that wins. And Pennsylvania's got a lot of recruits. Virginia, Maryland, Ohio. If you can go in Ohio State's backyard and get some. And James Franklin was getting kids from California and Florida. Like, Katron comes from IMG Academy down in Florida. So, like, what he's done for the program is great. But it's unfortunate the way his career is going to end at Penn State, or it has ended at Penn State. And it's really unfortunate for Drew Aller in the way his career has ended, just to go out like that. He doesn't even get a chance to shine in the post-Franklin era. Like, maybe Drew is able to run off, I don't know, Michigan State, Nebraska, Rutgers, win the last 3 games of the year. I don't know. Maybe he can win it, secure a game-winning drive at Iowa and Kinnick. Like, I don't think Drew's going to be looked at in a positive light. James Franklin's definitely not going to be looked at in a positive light. And it really is a shame.
It complicates such a good, upstanding legacy. Because, again, 104 wins in 11 and a half years, if you will, is roughly averaging 10 wins a year. Save for that 2020, 2021, COVID era and some other seasons here and there. He did everything that you wanted him to do. He won big games. He won bowl games. They appeared in 7 different New Year's Eve bowls. They didn't do that in the early 2000s, and they didn't do that towards the tail end of Joe Pa's career. But he was everything that you wanted, and somebody that was a representative of your university. He did it with class. He did it with dignity. Yeah, there were some ego issues, 100%. Yeah, could he be full of himself? I think so, and I think a lot of coaches are. There's an egomaniac aspect to coaching. And yeah, I think that got in the way. You mentioned the stubbornness. I don't know, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the second segment, how much of this is on Kotelnicki or is on James Franklin. I mean, the common denominator throughout the years is James Franklin. They've gone through multiple, offensive coordinators. So, I mean, there's a stubbornness there, but on paper and what he was able to do there, he was the perfect guy to come in after Bill O'Brien. He came in, got the job done, made them a perennial power in that 5 to 10 range, which is, not bad for Penn State. Considering where they were at times in the late 90s, early 2000s, that's really, really good. But now it was just they never took that, the good to great to elite that he mentioned in that braggadocious way years ago. Well, they never went to elite. They went out and got elite guys. They got guys like Andy Kodanicki and Jim Knowles. And listen, again, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the second segment. You can't always fault the coordinators. Again, the guys have to go out and play. And that's the reason why that and the fan base turning against Franklin are the reason why Pat Kraft made the decision that he did. You can't go out there when you lost the locker room and they have $700 million stadium renovations to pay for. Can't go out there when you lost the fan base either. And lo and behold, he pulls the trigger. It's aggressive, but that's Pat Kraft. Dude's a gambler. It's going to be very interesting to see what comes next for James Franklin, and especially for Penn State. We're going to talk a little bit more about that when we come back for the second segment of the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the second segment of the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. He's Kevin. I'm Jarrod. Kevin, now the big question is where does Penn State go from here? They're down their starting quarterback, and that has really been buried under all of this news about James Franklin and Terry Smith now being the interim guy. Both Pat Kraft and Terry Smith will be speaking to the media at 12 o'clock on Monday. But now it's Ethan Runkemeyer. And the schedule doesn't get any easier for Penn State. Not this year, at least. You've got Iowa this week. You're off at Ohio State. Home against Indiana. At Michigan State. Home against Nebraska. At Rutgers. So there's a lot that can happen. There are not very many wins as it stands on that table. I don't think that I'm very interested to see how this team responds to Terry Smith, who is a beloved guy in the program. He is the only coach that was there for the entirety of James Franklin's tenure. But man, I thought rock bottom was losing to UCLA in the manner in which they did, only for that to be usurped to lose to Northwestern in the way that they did Saturday night. The Boo Birds, the Fire Franklins, the F Franklins, everything, only to then be gashed and have them and lose in the manner in which they did. And rock bottom continuously is showing that there's no stopping it.
Yeah, tough timing for this. 6 days after your head coach is fired, you got to go to Kinnick for a 7 p.m. night game. Luckily, that's streaming only, so a large portion of the country probably won't be watching it. So that can at least hide in national irrelevancy behind the mainstream at least a little bit. I think this is a gut check. I think a lot of the players on the roster have a lot to prove. Katron's still got a draft stock to maintain. Nick's got a draft stock to maintain. There's a lot of seniors that came back who bet on themselves, who bet on the team, and do they start playing me ball? Do they band together back as a team? And this is the defining moment for this season, the same way that happened at UCLA. They do a full coaching turnover. They beat Penn State they beat them last week, and then they go to Spartanville in East Lansing and go up 35-13. They turn the corner on this season. Do I think Penn State's going to have that kind of turnaround? I don't. I think it remains to be seen, but I'm not confident in that. But the timing of it is important. There's still time for the coaching staff that's left to solidify the recruiting class. Get roster buy-in so that there's not some sort of mass exodus. Sure, when you bring in a new coach, the new coach is going to be able to bring in his players through the portal to try to keep his guys around, and then mesh the two rosters together. But like you said, there's 6 games left, 7 weeks. This is going to be a true test, and I don't know. Luckily there's a bye week after Iowa. I'm really fighting hard to, just set my eyes beyond the bye week, beyond Iowa State, beyond Indiana. I think if you get through those 3 games, I feel like that's 0-3 right there. And like, it's going to be a real gut check. The good thing is for Grunkemeyer is that, he's going to get 6 starts before he's probably the guy next year. So
Yeah.
Penn State's going to find out, A, if they have a dude, or B, if they need to go find a dude. And I think in college football, the recipe has been, if you don't have a dude, you go get one in the portal. You pay him $8 million like Duke did, and he ends up not being the dude. But yeah, I think this is a dress rehearsal for next year. Get as many guys, keep the seniors out there. Don't ruin their careers for the NFL draft because of what has happened. But go deeper on the roster. See what you have. That's the only way. And yeah, you put film out there for the portal, but you've got to evaluate them too, because you're going to have to evaluate your roster at the end of the season. So, yeah, I just hope that they can go 3-3 throughout the rest of the season. But I mean, if you're 6-6, if Penn State gets to 6-6, do you even want them to go to the bowl game?
Right. Yeah. I mean, especially with an interim coach, maybe it's a reward, but it's going to be very interesting to see kind of what they do. Obviously, I think Terry Smith. I mean, I was talking with some people last night, on my way home from the game about how Terry Smith was probably the best case scenario for the interim coach because he's a position group coach, not a coordinator, not Jim Knowles, not Andy Kotelnicki, not Lustig or whatever. But so, I mean, that aspect of it, I think, is very beneficial because now those guys can go do their things and not have to deal with the head coaching aspect of it. And Terry's been a great ambassador for the program, great coach. I think over the course of his time with the Nittany Lions. But it's going to be very interesting to see kind of where they go from here because the earliest, obviously, them getting rid of Franklin now allows them to really dictate who they go after as the coaching carousel heats up. You can go after guys like Urban Meyer. You can go after guys like Ed Orgeron, who aren't tied to programs right now, or you can now start those preliminary conversations with guys like Kurt Signetti, as agent, and Kenny Dillingham as well. But now it's going to be very interesting to see how aggressive Pat Kraft wants to be in getting his guy in there. A guy that they've talked about at length and ad nauseum is Matt Rule. I don't know that Matt Rule is the right guy for the program solely because it could end up being James Franklin 2.0. You have to, if you're Pat Kraft, you spent $49 million to get rid of this coach who has done nothing but 10-win seasons and yada yada yada. You have to go out and make a home run hire for this position. It is, I mean, your legacy at Penn State at stake simply because you made the decision to pull the trigger. Now you can't go out and get somebody that's worse than Franklin will be.
Yeah, I think that's the number one. That's the number one hurdle for this coaching search, is that the new coach is going to have lofty expectations. I don't know if they're there in year one, and I think they're going to have to. The fan base is going to have to be fair in the first year of, just because there's who knows, like there might just be a pole barn left up. It might just be a shell of a program at the end of this season. We don't know what it's going to look like. I don't think Rule's the guy. I think he likes Nebraska. I want to stay away. I almost want to stay away from the legacy coaches that are outside. Maybe a Dan Connor who's on the inside, but I think you have to go outside of the program and outside of the alumni and the Letterman base. I don't think Signetti's the guy. I don't want to mess with the buyout at Indiana. It's just not me. Urban, Saban, Edo, those guys are done. Saban's not going to come back either. I don't want Urban Meyer. He leaves programs in a dumpster fire. I think you got to go out and find the next James Franklin. You got to find the guy that's performing well at a Vanderbilt level program. I don't think you go and nab the Vanderbilt coach, but a Brent Key from Georgia Tech. I don't know if he leaves. He is a Letterman. He has a legacy at Georgia Tech. Kenny Dillingham, like you mentioned, from Arizona State. He's also a legacy at Arizona State. But a guy like John Summerall at Tulane, David Braun at Northwestern, what he was able to do at Northwestern with what Northwestern is able to provide in the resources. Can you go get a David Braun? He knows the conference. He knows the area. He obviously knows how to recruit the territory, even though it's Northwestern. Can you bring back Manny Diaz? Like, would Manny and Jim Knowles mesh? I don't know, but guy who had a lot of success with the program, does he want to come back? And, the other name that's been floating around is the Georgia defensive coordinator in Glenn Schumann. I don't know if you go with a non-head coach hire here in this scenario. It doesn't feel like that's the natural progression of things. But probably the best hire is going to be somebody's name who doesn't get floated out at all. I really don't know if James Franklin. I really don't remember if James Franklin's name was in the top 5 for the last coaching search. I honestly do not remember. I just remember him getting hired and go, who? So
right, and I mean it's tough. But every other coaching hire that I think that Pat Kraft has been willing to make, and moves that he's been willing to make, has been aggressive. And he's a gambler, and I think you have to love that as an athletic director. He's the antithesis of Sandy Barber, who put Penn State in this mess with James Franklin and his insane buyout. But I'm very interested to see kind of who they go after, and I think that's one of the deals where now we're going to be on plane search and jet watch, and the coaching carousel is about to heat up. I think Sharon Moore is probably a guy that could be on the hot seat at Michigan. Obviously, you have some of the lower schools that have made decisions. Trent Dilfer was fired at Alabama Birmingham. That's not necessarily the same ballpark, but because of the way that the timeline works now, you have to make this decision early, and you have to kind of live with it. And then once you go out and get your guy, then they get to put their team together, and they can do that easily through the portal. Put a staff together. I don't know who's at fault here because again, the common denominator has always been Franklin, but I'm very interested to see, did he have too much of a finger on the offense that wasn't letting AK do his thing? Obviously last year they had Swiss Army knife and Tyler Warren who could do it all, and that was great. We haven't really seen the passing. I think Drew Aller had before he got hurt, he had 137 yards. In the air, and 67 of that came on one play. So, I mean, is that AK? Is that James Franklin? Jim Knowles' defense, obviously we know that there are going to be some growing pains because these players aren't necessarily built for that system, so to speak. But, it's just one of those deals now where we get to see kind of where they go from here. And I'm very, very unsure of where that is. On both sides of the football, you got to figure out a way to get stops. But at the same time, now you can't enter the transfer portal until 5 days after. I think it's 5 days after your coach is hired. So, Penn State players can't enter the portal until 5 days after a new coach has been hired, not interim, but a new coach. And I'm very interested to see where and when that happens. Is it soon? Is it after the season? See, if it is a guy that's at a current school, like Signetti or Dillingham, just to throw out those names, or Lane Kiffin has been tossed up, personally, I would love it if it was Kiffin, selfishly, because that would make covering Penn State fun again. We fall into the same. I don't think that's an option. But
he's in a good situation at Ole Miss. He's always been in the SEC. Like, it just doesn't seem like. I really think it's just gonna be some random dude. Honestly. Yeah. Sorry.
Right, and I mean, so is how late do they go out? Because the good coaches are going to be playing well into January. So, and that's too late probably to make a decision because you need a guy, and you need a guy yesterday to get your recruiting classes together. They don't have any in the class of 2027 right now. They had a guy drop from 2026. We have a decommit tracker up on Nittany Sports Now that you guys can follow along as players decommit or reaffirm their commitment to the school, to Penn State. But yeah, I mean, there's such, 15 days ago, if you would have talked to me about, where Penn State would be after a loss to Oregon, I would have thought, okay, well, they're still going to be, 5-1, and go into Kinnick heavy favorites, probably double-digit favorites, and then preparing for that, epic game against Ohio State. But now it's the complete opposite. Now they're trying to salvage the season, trying to salvage, what's left of what was the most promising season, allegedly, for Penn State football. It's Franklin talked about that alignment all the time. Him and Neely Vendaputi and Pat Kraft. Well, where did they become misaligned? And that is seemingly why we're here at this turning point of the season.
Yeah, I think the season's going to be over after Thanksgiving. I don't think even if they go into bowl prep, I think the coaching search goes on after the first Saturday after Thanksgiving. As long as that team's not in the playoff, I think probably the coach is up for grabs. So, I don't know if Tulane's going to be the Group of 5 program. Maybe you can get Summerall in. I don't think Arizona State's going to make it. So there are going to be some names out there. It wouldn't be unheard of for a coach to leave, a coordinator to leave a program before a playoff run. But it's gonna be a long 7 weeks until we get through November. December should be interesting, even though Penn State's not going to have the playoff to look forward to. There's gonna be plenty of storylines. Like you said, the flight trackers. That's the most miserable part about Twitter is flight trackers and this person's going here and here's the new board of trustees agenda and all this other stuff. Like, it's fun, it's entertaining, but then just the rumor starts swirling. Not quite my cup of tea, but I feel like I'm just somber tonight. Like there's just so much.
It's a weird feeling.
There's so much to process. Like, did James Franklin underperform and did he deserve to get fired? Yeah. Does it still suck that he got fired? Yeah. Like, and then where do we go from here? There's half a season left, but the outlook is that we've now changed our eyesight from a national title game. Like, if they had beat Oregon, I was going to text my buddy who has season tickets to the Orange Bowl and be like, yo, can I buy your other seat so I can have a seat at the national championship game in case Penn State makes it. And now here we are. Is like, I don't even know if they're good enough for the Pop-Tarts Bowl. I think you got to have 7. You got to have 7 or 8 wins to get to the Pop-Tarts Bowl
and be in a certain conference. But that's the thing, Kevin. Like, we were at the Orange Bowl, the national semifinal, the heartbreaking loss to Notre Dame, and you're thinking the future is bright, right? The future. Okay, well, Penn State should be able to get back here now if people come back, and those people came back, but it has been so far from the expectations that it is so bizarre, right? I know I mentioned how weird it was on the field. I think, looking back, it did feel like it was Franklin's last time at Beaver Stadium. Just the way that he soaked kind of everything in, and listen, you can tell that he lost the fan base pretty easily. Same thing with the students, the ones that actually showed up, because half of them didn't bother. But it was such a somber night. It was just kind of sullen, but now it's this pivotal moment in Penn State's program history. Where do you go? Like we said, where do you go from here, right? And to that end, I mean, it's not going to get again any prettier. But we went from talking about national championship aspirations, number 2 team in the rankings, to now we're hopeful that they win another game, and that's such a 180-degree turn from what we thought was going to happen this year that it's so hard to kind of grasp the brevity of this situation and the brevity of how bad this team has performed and not even come close to meeting any expectations.
Yeah, I mean, we're 6 hours removed from this, and like, my wife asked me before I came up, she was like, "What's your hot take on this?" And I was like, "I don't know if there is one." Like, it's just like I'm in like emotional purgatory. It feels like it's just, as a fan and as a semi-amateur media member, like it's something I've never covered before, and B it's just weird. So I'm interested to see where it goes. Hopefully the rest of the season is, entertaining. Hopefully they can turn it around. And just do enough to keep this roster good for next year.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the crazy thing as we watch the rest of this unfold, because the dominoes are going to continue to fall. They're falling on the recruiting trail with guys decommitting left and right, but it's that active roster that's the worry, and making sure you have enough guys, as you for the rest of your season. And that, I think, is going to be the big thing moving forward for Penn State. Can they salvage the season, and then who they hire from there, and what they decide to do with the program. But we're going to be here the rest of the season. But we're going to come back for the third and final segment and have plenty more to talk about on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the third and final segment of the Lasching Out Podcast and Nittany Sports Now Network. He's Kevin. I'm Jarrod. Kevin, believe it or not, a lot of stuff happened throughout college football this weekend. Pitt upset Florida State in their annual ranked win that they probably shouldn't get. That puts Mike Norvell's seat on the very hot. You had Florida lose yet again to Texas A&M. Billy Napier's seat is getting very, very hot. And, and Oregon lost to Indiana, and Kirstie Netty's stock is significantly rising, as is the Hoosiers, as they continue their trek up the Big Ten ladder.
Yep. We picked 6 games this week. Obviously, we both picked Penn State, and we've covered that enough. Ohio State was taking on Illinois and was pretty dominant. I don't think there's anything new we learned. Indiana's stock is on the rise, but are they any good? And I mean that not as a hater. Oregon barely gets past what we now know as a hot dog water caliber Penn State team. The win wasn't completely out of the sales. And, I think the Penn State team 3 weeks ago was a lot better than what it was against Northwestern. They beat the crap out of Illinois, but Illinois just played really sloppy. And then Indiana just started feeding off that night game at home. I think that was in Bloomington. Their best, or Oregon's best win is Northwestern this year. So, yeah, Indiana traveled out to Eugene and they got a win over Oregon, but I don't know if our barometer is fully calibrated for how actually good Indiana is. Don't get me wrong; they've been dominant. They have looked good. I just don't know if the opponents that they've played are good.
And do you really know that at any point for any of these teams? No. College football is so wild right now, and anything can happen on any given Saturday, and it's just kind of wild.
Yeah, this season's nuts. I love it. I don't even know who the number 2 or 3 team in the country is right now.
The Heisman front runner is Pudge the Cat.
I don't know who that
He's the
only.
It's Bowling Green's mascot, like their locker room cat.
Let's see. Alabama, Missouri. I picked Alabama. You picked Mizzou. Alabama turned Bo Perulla over on 2 interceptions and was able to pull away late from that one. We both picked Oregon over Indiana. Potentially foolish by us. Georgia gets past Auburn, and then Michigan put a beat down, or USC put a beat down on Michigan. I thought Michigan had finally turned a corner. I didn't really actually know how good USC was. I of course picked the Wolverines. You picked the Trojans. But we were both 3-3 this week on picks. So not a good week for us, but a good week if you were wanting to be entertained by some exciting upsets.
Yeah. College football is a wild ride right now. And I think that's kind of the thing to be paying attention to, because, every week is something new, something fascinating. It's what coach is going to be next to fall, what team is going to be next to fall, what team's going to surprise another. And again, the beauty of it is anything can happen. And that might be an understatement. There are just things that are going all over the place, and it's kind of crazy to even think about that. But that's why they play the game, and that's why college football is college football.
Yeah. The other thing, Texas beat the crap out of Oklahoma. Oklahoma was number 6. John Mateer coming back from injury. 3 picks in the Red River rivalry. Not what you're looking for there. And then just to throw him a bone, Colorado did upset Iowa State at home.
Yeah, and they rushed the field.
And then Utah put a big fat number on Arizona State as well.
The 21st. It's such a weird season. If you would have sat here and told me week 0 or whatever that we'd be in the situation that we're in right now with Penn State and with other teams across the country, Texas and Penn State, number 1 and number 2 to start the season, both unranked, both, playing not up to their standards and expectations. Sure. But the way that they have done it has been impressive. And now, for Penn State, they have to go find another coach. They have to go figure out a way to finish out these next 6 games. And it's going to be something that's a daunting task. And much respect to Terry Smith and his body of work at Penn State. I'm thrilled that he gets this opportunity. But it is a bittersweet time. Franklin is a guy that we kind of grew up with at Penn State, and I think that's one of those situations where you feel for the person, but and as the coach, it was time, and it was that simple. And now Penn State gets to make and Pat Kraft get to make the next decision and see where that takes them.
Yep. All that's ahead of us is 7 p.m. in Iowa next Saturday night.
And plenty of uncertainty. Kevin, what is certain? Do you have, or I guess maybe it is uncertain, do you have a parting shot?
No, I'm wiped. Busy weekend. Ran the Army 10 miler in DC this weekend or today. Beat my goal pace, which was pretty exciting. I do have to pat myself on the back for that. So I had a good weekend. I'm gonna keep it positive just because there's been so much. It's been a rough weekend.
That's one way to describe it.
So
one way to describe it. But Kevin and I will be here to dissect games, talk about Penn State football the rest of the season. What happens after that remains to be seen. But for Kevin Quigley, this has been Jarrod Prugar. We thank you, as always, for listening to the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. We'll talk to you again later this week.